Gasps echoed through the airplane cabin the second it happened. Passengers turned, their heads in shock as a sharp voice cut through the quiet hum of the aircraft engines. The peaceful atmosphere that had filled the plane just moments earlier suddenly felt tense, as if the air itself had tightened. "Ma'am, I told you already, this is not acceptable." Standing stiffly in the aisle was a flight attendant named Lauren, her face tight with irritation and her jaw clenched. Her neatly pressed uniform contrasted sharply with the frustration written all over her expression. Several passengers nearby shifted in their seats, sensing that something unpleasant was unfolding. In front of her sat a calm black woman, dressed in a neat navy blazer that looked professional and elegant. Her natural curls were styled beautifully and pinned carefully at the back, forming a tidy, polished look that matched her confident posture. Her name was Danielle Brooks, and until that moment, she had been quietly reading a document on her tablet. She looked like someone used to working during travel-focused, composed, and completely unbothered by the usual noise of passengers settling into their seats. "I'm not causing any trouble," Danielle replied softly, lifting her eyes from the tablet. Her voice was calm and respectful, but firm. "I'm just sitting in my assigned seat." Lauren crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her tones sharp and impatient. "Your hair's blocking the screen behind you," the passenger sitting there complained. Several nearby passengers exchanged confused looks. A woman across the aisle leaned slightly forward, studying Danielle's hairstyle. There was nothing unusual about it. Danielle's hair was styled neatly and wasn't oversized at all. It didn't spill into the aisle or extend far beyond her seat. "I can adjust slightly if needed," Danielle said politely. "But there's no reason to speak to me like this." Lauren sighed loudly. The sound filled with exaggerated frustration that made a few passengers glance at each other uncomfortably. "Just fix it already," she snapped. Danielle remained calm. She gently adjusted her posture, moving her head slightly to the side and sitting straighter in her seat. Her movements were careful and respectful, clearly showing she was willing to cooperate. But the passenger behind her, a middle-aged man with a tired, annoyed expression, still muttered complaints under his breath. "I still can't see properly," he grumbled, shaking his head dramatically. Lauren's irritation only grew. Her patience, already thin, seemed to snap entirely. Her breathing grew heavier, and her eyes narrowed as if she had decided that Danielle was the problem, even though Danielle had already complied. And then, the moment that would change everything, she reached forward and yanked Danielle's hair. A collective gasp filled the cabin. Danielle froze instantly, her body going completely still as shock spread across her face. Her hands tightened slightly around the tablet in her lap. Passengers stared in disbelief. One man near the window dropped his magazine. Another woman covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horror. The silence that followed felt heavier than the airplane itself. Lauren stepped back as if nothing unusual had happened, brushing her hands together as though she had simply adjusted an object, not touched a person. "There," she said sharply. "Now it's fixed." Danielle slowly turned around, her eyes filled with shock, not anger, yet just pure disbelief. Her lips parted slightly as if she couldn't quite process what had just occurred. "You just touched my hair," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, but the tension beneath it was unmistakable. It carried a weight that made several passengers sit up straighter. "You pulled my hair." The cabin remained silent. Even the man behind her stopped muttering. Everyone knew something serious had just happened. They just didn't know how serious yet. Danielle didn't shout. She didn't argue. Instead, she took a slow, steady breath, as if forcing herself to remain calm despite the humiliation she had just experienced. Her fingers lightly brushed the front of her navy blazer as she straightened it, restoring her posture with quiet dignity. The movement was small, but it showed control that made the situation feel even more intense. "I'd like to speak to the supervisor," she said calmly. Her voice was level and steady. "You're not raised in anger, yet strong enough to command." "Attention!" Lauren rolled her eyes dramatically, clearly annoyed that Danielle wasn't reacting emotionally the way she expected. "For what?" Lauren replied sharply. "You're making this bigger than it is." Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The tension in the cabin was becoming impossible to ignore. A woman seated across the aisle leaned closer to her husband and whispered under her breath, "Did she really just pull her hair?" Her husband nodded slowly, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. "I saw it," he whispered back. Another passenger, a young man sitting 2 rows ahead, quietly pulled out his phone. Without drawing attention to himself, he angled it slightly, making sure he was recording. The quiet clicking sound of the camera starting was barely noticeable, but the seriousness of the moment made it feel louder than it was. Danielle stayed composed. Her face remained calm, but her eyes showed determination. She wasn't going to let the situation slide, and she certainly wasn't going to lose control. "I'd like to speak to the supervisor," she repeated. This time, her voice carried more firmness, still polite, but unmistakably serious. Lauren let out a long, exaggerated sigh, as if dealing with something terribly inconvenient. She pressed a button on the intercom panel beside her, her finger tapping impatiently against the plastic surface. Supervisor 2 row 14, she muttered into the device. Minutes later, footsteps approached from the front of the cabin. A senior crew member named Captain Reyes walked into the aisle. His presence immediately changed the mood. He carried himself with calm authority, his uniform perfectly pressed and his expression serious but controlled. Passengers straightened in their seats, sensing that things were about to become official. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. His voice was calm, but it carried weight, the kind of tone that demanded honesty. Lauren spoke first, her voice quick and defensive, as if trying to control the story before anyone else could speak. "This passenger refused to adjust her hair after multiple complaints from another passenger," she said, pointing briefly toward Danielle. Danielle listened silently, her expression unchanged. She didn't interrupt, she didn't react, she simply waited. Then Captain Reyes turned toward her, his attention fully focused. "Ma'am, is that accurate?" he asked respectfully. Danielle shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "I adjusted when asked. But then your flight attendant pulled my hair without permission." The words hung in the air like a sudden drop in temperature. Captain Reyes blinked, clearly taken aback. "Pulled your hair?" he repeated. Before Lauren could respond, several passengers spoke at once, their voices overlapping in urgency. "Yes, she did. I saw it. She grabbed it." One older woman raised her hand slightly, as if confirming testimony in a courtroom. "It wasn't an accident," she added firmly. Laurent's face began to lose color. The confidence she had displayed earlier slowly drained away, replaced by visible anxiety. Captain Reyes turned toward her, his expression tightening. "Lauren, is that true?" Lauren hesitated. For the first time, she looked unsure. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out at first. Her eyes flickered toward the surrounding passengers, noticing the number of witnesses staring directly at her. "I just moved it slightly," she muttered, her voice no longer sharp, now small and uncertain. Danielle calmly reached into her bag. Her movements were slow and deliberate, drawing everyone's attention. "I believe this will clarify things," she said. She held up her phone. The black screen reflected the worried faces of nearby passengers, and then she pressed play. The video showed everything: the complaint, the argument, and the exact moment Lauren reached forward and yanked Danielle's hair. Gasps echoed through the cabin once again, louder than before. A man in the back shook his head in disbelief. Another passenger whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Lauren's confidence shattered instantly. Shoulders slumped slightly as reality set in. But what happened next would shock everyone even more. Captain Reyes watched the video carefully, his expression growing more serious with every second. The small screen reflected in his eyes as the footage replayed the moment again: the argument, the frustration, and then the unmistakable action of Lauren reaching forward and yanking Danielle's hair. His jaw tightened slightly as he watched, his usual calm demeanor replaced with visible concern. When the video ended, the cabin was silent again. Even the low hum of the airplane engines seemed quieter, as if the entire aircraft was holding its breath. Lauren swallowed hard. I didn't mean she started, her voice trembling slightly as panic began to creep in. But Captain Reyes raised his hand, stopping her mid-sentence, and his voice was calm but firm. It carried authority that made it clear he had seen enough to understand exactly what had happened. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Danielle with respectful attention, "I sincerely apologize for what you experienced." Danielle nodded slightly, acknowledging the apology without showing anger. "I appreciate that," she replied. Her tone remained calm, but there was strength behind her words, a quiet confidence that made everyone nearby listen closely. But she wasn't done. "I'd also like to inform you," she continued, her voice steady and professional, "that touching someone without consent, especially in a way that involves their hair, is not just disrespectful. It can be considered harassment." The word harassment seemed to echo in the minds of everyone listening. Lauren shifted uncomfortably, her shoulders stiffening. She avoided eye contact, staring down at the floor as if hoping to disappear. Passengers nearby nodded in agreement. One old woman shook her head slowly, clearly disappointed. Another passenger whispered quietly, "She's right," under his breath. Then Danielle reached into her bag again. Her movements were calm and deliberate, as if she had done this many times before in professional settings. This time, she pulled out a sleek leather folder, clean, polished, an official-looking. Captain Reyes noticed immediately. "What is that?" he asked, curiosity and concern mixing in his voice. Danielle opened the folder slowly, making sure everyone nearby could see. Inside was an official badge. It gleamed under the cabin lights, reflecting authority and professionalism. "I am attorney Danielle Brooks, civil rights lawyer," she said calmly. The words landed like thunder. Laurent's face turned pale almost instantly. The last trace of confidence drained from her expression, replaced by visible fear. Passengers murmured in surprise. "Eh? Lawyer," someone whispered. "A civil rights lawyer?" Another passenger repeated, clearly shocked subtly. The situation felt much bigger than a simple disagreement between a flight attendant and a passenger. and now carried legal weight, serious consequences that no one could ignore. Danielle continued, speaking her tone steady and controlled. I travel frequently, she said, and I understand airline policies very well. Her words were measured, careful, and precise, like someone used to speaking in courtrooms and professional meetings. She paused briefly, allowing the weight of her statement to settle in the air. But what just happened here crossed a serious line. Her voice didn't rise, yet it carried undeniable authority. Captain Reyes nodded slowly, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation now. His expression had shifted from concern to determination. He knew this was no longer just an internal issue. It was something that could affect the airline's reputation and legal standing. Orny said quietly, his tone now firm and official, step aside. Lahan's hands trembled slightly as she obeyed. Her fingers twitched nervously at her sides, and her breathing became shallow. She knew her career was now hanging by a thread. The realization settled, and heavily on her shoulders, like a weight she couldn't shake off. Just minutes earlier, she had been confident and irritated. Now fear had completely taken over. Passengers continued to watch in silence, fully aware that they had just witnessed something serious, something that would likely have lasting consequences. But deep down, everyone sensed the same thing. The consequences were only just beginning. Lauren stood near the front of the cabin, her face pale and tense. The confident, sharp expression she had worn earlier was completely gone. In its place was mixed with disbelief at how quickly the situation had spiraled out of control. Her hands rested stiffly at her sides, fingers slightly curled as if she didn't know what to do with them anymore. Passengers watched closely. Some whispered quietly to each other, their voices low but filled with disbelief. Others simply stared, their eyes fixed on Lauren as if trying to understand how something so small had turned into something so serious. A man sitting near the aisle leaned toward his wife and murmured, "This is going to end badly for her." His wife nodded slowly, her face tight with concern. Captain Reyes returned to Danielle, his posture calm, yet professional. His steps were measured, careful, and respectful, as if he wanted to reassure her that the situation was now under control. "Ms. Brooks," he said respectfully, "we will file an official report immediately." Danielle nodded once, acknowledging his words. "I would appreciate that," she replied. Her tone remained calm, steady, and composed. Even now, she showed no signs of anger or emotional outbursts, only quiet strength. But then something unexpected happened. Lauren slowly stepped forward. Her confident attitude from earlier had completely vanished. Each step she took looked heavy, as if her feet weighed more than they should. She hesitated halfway down the aisle, glancing briefly at the passengers who were still watching her closely. Some of them avoided eye contact, others watched her without blinking. "Miss Brooks," she said quietly. Danielle looked up. Their eyes met for the first time since the apology from Captain Reyes. Lauren swallowed hard, her throat tightened as words struggled to come out. The silence in the cabin made the moment feel even heavier. "I'm sorry." Her voice shook slightly, barely louder than a whisper. The words sounded fragile, as if they had taken great effort to say. "I acted without thinking," she continued. "I was frustrated, but that doesn't excuse what I did." Passengers leaned in, listening carefully. Even those who had been pretending not to pay attention were now fully focused on the exchange. The tension in the cabin shifted slightly, not gone, but changing shape. Lauren continued speaking, her eyes lowered. "I shouldn't have touched you," she admitted. "I shouldn't have treated you that way." Her voice cracked slightly at the end of the sentence. Danielle studied her face carefully. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react immediately. Instead, she observed, watching every detail of Lauren's expression. For the first time, Lauren looked genuinely ashamed. Not defensive, not angry, ashamed. Her shoulders were slumped forward, and her usual professional posture had completely collapsed. The confidence that once filled her voice had been replaced by vulnerability. "I understand mistakes happen," Danielle said calmly. Her voice remained steady, neither harsh nor forgiving, simply honest. "But actions have consequences." The words landed firmly, not as punishment, but as truth. Lauren nodded slowly. "I know," she whispered. Her eyes glistened slightly, though she tried hard to maintain composure. She blinked rapidly, as if fighting the urge to break down in front of everyone. Captain Reyes stepped forward again, sensing that the emotional moment had reached its natural end. "Lauren," said firmly, "after landing, you will meet with airline management for immediate review." Lauren's shoulders dropped instantly. She knew what that meant. Suspension, possibly termination, her entire career at risk because of one reckless moment. A moment that, only minutes ago, had seemed small and unimportant to her. Now it felt enormous. Her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't control. Years of training, long hours, working difficult flights, early mornings, late nights, missed family gatherings, all the sacrifices she had made to build her career suddenly flashed through her mind. All of it now felt fragile. All of it now felt uncertain. Passengers continued watching quietly, their expressions mixed with sympathy and judgment. Some felt sorry for her, others believed she was simply facing the consequences of her actions. A young woman seated near the window whispered softly to her friend, "This is why people have to think before acting." Her friend nodded silently. Lauren slowly stepped back toward the front of the cabin, her movements mechanical, as if she were operating on autopilot. She avoided looking at Danielle again, unsure of what she might see in her eyes. Disappointment, anger, or something worse, indifference. She leaned lightly against the wall near the galley, taking slow breaths as reality settled deeper into her mind. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to fully feel the weight of what she had done. Not just the action itself, but the disrespect behind it. The assumption. The impatience. The moment she chose control instead of professionalism. Her chest tightened as regret flooded in. Not the kind of regret that fades quickly, but the kind that lingers. The kind that stays with you long after the moment has passed. Across the aisle, Danielle remained seated calmly, her posture still composed. She picked up her tablet again, though she didn't immediately resume reading. Her eyes remained thoughtful, distant, as if processing everything that had just happened. Captain Reyes stood nearby, making notes on a small tablet. Every detail carefully. Procedure mattered now, accountability mattered now, and forlorn. Every passing second felt heavier than the last. She glanced briefly toward the passengers, noticing how differently they looked at her now. Earlier, she had been just another flight attendant, confident, in control, respected. Now she felt exposed, judged, vulnerable. Her identity, her professionalism, her pride, everything felt shaken. And for the first time, true regret filled her eyes. Not fear of punishment, not fear of losing her job, but regret for the moment. She let frustration overpower respect. Regret for forgetting that every passenger deserved dignity. Regret for not thinking before acting, because deep down, she now understood something painful but necessary. One reckless moment, one careless decision, could change everything in an instant. No one spoke loudly anymore. The earlier buzz of casual conversations had completely faded, replaced by a quiet stillness that felt heavier than before. Even the usual sounds of passengers shifting in their seats or pressing overhead buttons seemed softer, as if everyone was being extra careful not to disturb the fragile atmosphere inside the cabin. But something had changed. The tension that once surrounded Danielle had turned into something else. Respect. Passengers treated Danielle with quiet respect. When a few people stood to stretch their legs or head toward the restroom, they slowed as they passed her seat. Some gave her small nods of acknowledgement. A few even thanked her softly when walking past. Not because she was a lawyer, but because she stayed calm, because she stood up for herself with dignity. A middle-aged woman paused briefly near Danielle's seat and whispered, "You handled that with so much grace." Danielle responded with a small nod and a polite smile. She didn't seek attention, she didn't encourage praise, she simply remained composed, returning her focus to her tablet as if nothing extraordinary had happened, though everyone on the plane knew otherwise. Further back in the cabin, the man who had originally complained about her hair avoided looking in her direction. He sat stiffly in his seat, staring straight ahead, clearly uncomfortable with the role he had played in starting the conflict. The earlier confidence he had shown was gone, replaced by silent embarrassment. Across the aisle, a young college student whispered quietly to his friend. She didn't even raise her voice once. His friend nodded. "That's real strength," she replied. Time moved slowly, but eventually, the plane began its descent. The captain's voice echoed through the speakers, announcing their arrival. Normally, passengers would feel relief and excitement at landing, but today, the mood remained thoughtful and quiet. As the aircraft touched down, the wheels hitting the runway created a soft jolt that snapped everyone back to reality. Moments later, the plane rolled to a stop at the gate. Passengers waited patiently as the seatbelt sign turned off. But unlike a typical flight, no one rushed to stand immediately. Many glanced toward Danielle, still thinking about what had happened and how calmly she had handled it. After landing, airline representatives were already waiting at the gate. Their presence signaled that the situation had been taken seriously. From the very beginning, Captain Reyes personally escorted Danielle down the aisle. His posture remained respectful, his tone professional but sincere. "We are deeply sorry," he said again as they approached the aircraft door. Danielle nodded, accepting the apology with quiet understanding. "I appreciate your professionalism," she replied. Her voice carried no bitterness, only firmness and clarity. As she prepared to leave the aircraft, gathering her belongings and adjusting the strap of her bag, one elderly passenger approached her slowly. He had kind eyes and moved carefully, leaning slightly on a cane. "Young lady," he said gently, his voice warm and sincere, "you handled that better than most people would." Danielle smiled faintly. There was gratitude in her expression, but also humility. "Thank you," she replied softly. The elderly man nodded, respectfully before stepping aside to allow her to exit. Meanwhile, Lauren sat quietly in the crew area near the front of the plane, Her head lowered, she remained still, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed by. The earlier confidence she once carried had disappeared completely. Her uniform still looked neat, but her posture told a different story, one of exhaustion, fear, and regret. Reality had finally settled in, not as a sudden shock anymore, as a slow, heavy weight pressing against her thoughts. One careless action, one moment of disrespect, had nearly destroyed everything she worked for. She replayed the moment in her mind again and again, the frustration, the impatience, the decision she made without thinking. If only she had paused, if only she had listened, if only she had chosen professionalism over anger. But now, those if-only thoughts couldn't undo what had already happened. Later that week, the airline issued an official apology. This statement was clear and direct, acknowledging the seriousness of the incident and reaffirming their commitment to passenger respect and safety. News of the event spread quickly within company channels, and employees across multiple departments were informed about the situation. But the airline didn't stop at words. They took action. New mandatory training programs were announced for all staff, focused on respect, professionalism, and cultural awareness. These sessions were designed not just to teach policies, but to remind employees of something more important: human dignity. Every crew member, from new hires to experienced staff, was required to attend. Videos were shown, scenarios were discussed, real-life examples were analyzed. And in every session, one message stood above the rest: respect every passenger. No exceptions. Danielle never celebrated the incident. She didn't post about it on social media. She didn't brag to colleagues or friends. She simply moved forward with her life, continuing her work as a civil rights attorney, traveling to meetings, courtrooms, and conferences, as she always had. To her, the incident wasn't about winning or proving a point. It was about standing firm when dignity was challenged, about showing strength without losing composure, about responding with professionalism in uncomfortable moments. Back at the airline, Lauren faced the consequences of her actions. She attended disciplinary meetings. She listened to supervisors, explained company policies she already knew, but had failed to follow. She participated in the same mandatory training sessions as everyone else, but for her, each lesson felt personal. Every example of respectful conduct reminded her of the moment she failed to show it. Every discussion about professionalism reminded her of the decision that changed her career. Yet through it all, she began to understand something deeper. Mistakes don't just affect policies, they affect people. They affect trust, they affect dignity. And once broken, trust is difficult to rebuild. Weeks passed. The memory of the incident slowly faded for most passengers who had been on that flight, but for Lauren and Danielle, the lesson remained clear and unforgettable. Respect isn't optional. It doesn't depend on mood, stress, or frustration. It doesn't depend on authority or position. It applies to everyone, everywhere, at all times. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you work. It doesn't matter how tired or stressed you feel. The moment you cross someone's boundaries, you step into dangerous territory, and consequences don't always wait. Sometimes they arrive quickly. Sometimes they arrive unexpectedly, but they always arrive, because dignity is not negotiable. Respect is not a suggestion. It is a responsibility, and sometimes minutes later is all it takes to change your life forever.